Higurashi When They Cry is a beloved series of mine. Ever since it was adapted a long time ago, I love this series. It's always been a staple in my area of horror anime that just did everything right. So obviously when Higurashi When They Cry Go was announced, I was really excited for it. Not only that, but it was hinted at being something that was for old fans and new fans. And obviously as we got into Go, we found out why that is. Yes, it retells a lot of stories, but it shifts at some point to give the returning fans something new to get into. But this is my review of Higurashi When They Cry Sotsu, a 15-episode series that followed the Go series. I'm going to have a spoiler-free review, followed by a spoiler-filled review, just so that people that have never seen the series before can get something out of this review before I get into, obviously, being pretty much a 5th season, and get into my thoughts overall that I can actually talk about things. So with that said, let's jump into it. For those unfamiliar with the series, it takes place at around 1983 in Hinamizawa, which is a village in the outskirts of Japan. And giving us a perspective from the outside looking in, we follow a guy named Keiichi who is recently moved to Hinamizawa. And as such, we get a lot of perspective into the traditions of the area, the history of the area, which was kind of violent. They have this whole thing where there was a dam at some point that was being put up, and there was a huge riot against it, because obviously people don't want their homes flooded. But not only that, but there's a sort of myth that every year on the same day for this traditional festival, that somebody dies. And it's always claimed to be something to do with this curse, where every year somebody dies and somebody goes missing. And it's always claimed to be a part of the curse, but yet there's always this hint that somebody might be, or at least a family might be behind it. And while on the surface it's a typical village, very tight-knit, not really liking outsiders, you have a lot of interaction between Keiichi and his friends, just enjoying their time at school together. All the while, there's this mystery that's about, and this curse that often drives people crazy. So again, my spoiler-free thoughts on this series for those that have never gone into this series before. Again, this is technically the 5th season of the series. And what I mean by that is that essentially with the original series, Higurashi When They Cry, Kai, and Rei, it essentially is a series that follows these individuals as they deal with this loop. Essentially, whenever something really terrible happens, it seems as if everything resets back to a certain point before things play out again, maybe slightly different. And as it goes along in the original series, you end up kind of finding these commonalities between each of these loops, and eventually the desire to kind of break from this loop, and also the effects that that loop has on people. And so it explained how that changes, or why Go and Sotsu are a sequel to it. Yes, you get a replay of a lot of those stories in Go, but what actually happens is that the things causing behind the scenes slightly changes. So even though you don't necessarily need to watch the original series, because a lot of things get explained in Sotsu and Go, you'll get a lot more out of it, and you'll get a lot more new things from the situation. Which does mean that technically, if you do watch Go and Sotsu, because they are technically newer, they do look a lot better, you'll still get something out of the original series, but you'll get a lot more if you watch the original series and then come into Go and Sotsu. So, it's up to you. Like I said, you'll get more benefit, but it doesn't require it. And let's be honest, for some characters, you kind of do get a little bit more sense of just what they're going through if you watch that original series. But like I said, it's a phenomenal series. I've always encouraged people to watch the original series. It's a fantastic story. It's anime horror done right. Yes, there's a lot of horror anime out there. A lot of them are sort of cheesy. A lot of them are really more focused on just insanity and eeriness. And I think this one does everything right. It does shock horror. It does suspense. It does psychological horror. All that stuff, it does it very well. As you see these characters pushed to their limits and just driven mad by essentially everything that's happening around them. And I think that holds true for Go and Sotsu as well. Though I will say, and I'll expand more when I get into my spoiler-filled review, is I don't believe in the end that Go and Sotsu lives up to the pinnacle that was the original series. And I think a lot of that's driven by essentially the backbone of the story. What is the root cause? Yes, they're similar, but at the same time, they're different. And I think that root cause and the resolve of that root cause wasn't as satisfactory as the original series was. Additionally, visually, Passione did an excellent job on this series. I know the original series had its issues, but I think over time it got better. And I think Passione really pulled off with this season. I think a lot of the scenes that were also technically redone in this particular series. Like I said, a lot of it's being, there's a lot of retelling of certain things, but a different perspective. And I think a lot of those scenes were just amplified by some really great directing, great visuals, great perspective shots that really do bring in the tone of the horror and the psychological thriller aspect that this series just is so well known for. Add in Akio Watanabe, who of course did the Monogatari series for character designs. Love their character designs, and it just becomes a really thrilling experience. That said, that is my spoiler-free review of Higurashi When They Cry Sotsu. From this point on, I will be getting to my spoiler thoughts, which will help me out to really kind of explain my mentality, because let's be honest, if you know anything about the players and what's going on when Sotsu starts, it pretty much spoils everything before this, so keep that in mind. Beyond this point, full-on spoilers for Higurashi When They Cry, the original series, Go, and Sotsu. So yeah, obviously coming into Sotsu, we are at the point now where we're really following Sadako as she's trying to drive Rika to never go to the school. And as I mentioned previously, I think when I did some sort of review for Go, one of my main frustrations early on was around the villain Sadako. And I never really felt like she was a solid villain. I've mentioned before with my talks on the original series, Takano was a character that made sense. You follow her backstory, you see what's her driving force, and that is to prove the existence of the curse. So her essentially going to these far of reaches and causing mass death and destruction is essentially what will get her her main goal, which to vindicate the research that her father did, or her grandfather, her guardian. And I think when we get into Go and Sotsu, again, my main struggle was around the idea that our driving force to this loop again was around not wanting to study. And again, I do acknowledge the idea that this is a spiral effect, that it starts out from the aspect of I don't want to study, then it goes to I'm jealous of her and the friends that she now has, to she abandoned me and I want her back, to I cannot be apart from this person, to I must keep her next to me, which then turns to the witch, which then turns to madness. Again, I acknowledge that spiral effect, but at the same time, it's an extreme that, yes, fits the Higurashi realm, but I always had this feeling of like, the driving force is no longer a disease. The driving force is now selfishness, and that selfishness just jumps way to the extremes very quickly. Now, granted, when I look at the sum of everything all in one, it doesn't bother me as much. It was just that progression that I found a little bit frustrating. But then looking back on it, I'm fine with it. Additionally, the other aspect that I kind of get frustrated with is after everything that has happened all the way up until the end, there's no real repercussion, nor is there really any acknowledgement of what has been done. We're talking about some serious dirtying of hands, and yet there's nothing really there to say, crap, you did this, or crap, I did this. It really is a game of the witches, yes. But for the non-witches, it's devastating, and it's never acknowledged. Similar to what we kind of experienced with Rika and their aspect of becoming the witch in the original series, what they kind of acknowledged is the idea that she could no longer be the witch. And what it was actually acknowledging there was Rika's inability to acknowledge the death that was around her. Specifically, they point out the fact that Rika herself acknowledges that she never really wanted to get close to her mother because she always knew her mother would die. And this was the aspect of the witch. This was this cold-heartedness that she has locked her own heart up in so that she never realizes what's around her that she's losing, basically. And this is something that Sadako never really experiences, and even to the end doesn't acknowledge. And I think that's a huge loss. So it's one of those things where I don't necessarily think it's required to have all these aspects play out, but at the same time, it kind of bites to think that there was more potential here to explore things rather than, yes, unfortunately, play a lot of replayed clips that were from the Go series again and again in order to fill in the gaps. With all that said, and all my negativity behind me, let's move into the positive, because I do have a lot of positive here. Like I mentioned before, it looks great. A lot of the portrayal of a lot of the scenes was fantastic. I especially loved getting into pretty much Rina's story again, getting into Mion's story in a different perspective and with a different studio. Yes, technically with the Go series, we did technically play out a lot of these scenes again, but I feel like it kind of ramped up with Sotsu, especially the early on. I think Rena's portrayal of her story in the very beginning of the season was absolutely fantastic. It had me so pumped for the rest of the season. I'm like, I completely, my issues with Sadako was completely put to the backside because I loved how they were portraying out the scene. Yes, the entire time I'm really angry because I'm like, Sadako, what the hell are you doing? How are you so cold-hearted, even though you have not had the witch completely take over? But seeing those scenes play out again in the way that they did was fantastic. Having Rika off the side going, pretty much, yay, this is going to work out. Everything's fantastic. And then it blows up in her face. Essentially, how they played out that contrast was perfect. Having Rika happy, but then slaughters happening behind the wall. Having Rika always believe that she's going to see happiness and it not work out. Even watching Sadako manipulate Uncle Hojo and the rest of the city was fantastic. It was that extra perspective of everything that I really loved. The original series, what I loved so much about it was, even though it was replaying a lot of these loops, it was always shown from a different perspective. And they did that similarly here, but yes, from the perspective of Rika thinking that things were going well, but also from Sadako knowing that things weren't going to go well. And seeing those different perspectives this time around, again, it resparked my love for the Higurashi series. Again, it was what I love so much about the original Higurashi series. Not only that, but even though I have, again, my issues with Sadako, it's something whenever you have situations playing out for certain characters that makes you so angry, shows how much you're invested in the series. And yeah, you can kind of chop that up probably from my love of the original series, but just watching what Sadako does to Rina, and Rina have this kind of slow downfall into madness that I've always loved about the series. Again, it's so heartbreaking, but at the same time, so well done because of that. And yes, granted, putting aside my how the heck did she inject Mion with the syringe, or how she injected all these other people when they weren't put asleep or something aside, it was the same thing for all those other characters. Oishi, watching him go into madness. Mion, watching her go into madness. Sadly, a lot of these other ones didn't really get fleshed out as much as I was hoping that they would. Again, I'm not sure why they spent the time replaying scenes when they could have gotten to that stuff. The final 5 loops that Rina was counting down, you could have gotten a little more into those rather than do replayed ritual scene 15 times. But again, it's fine. So let's get into my finale thoughts. I've got a whole video on my thoughts on the finale. To give you the short, really, end of it is, I'm happy in the end. I'm fine with it. At the same time, I was a little bit let down. I was really hoping for something more, 2 aspects. One, either have a bittersweet end where maybe things don't go well for Sadako and she's left in either a reset itself using the sword, or to have her be in isolation. Or the other hand, to have her at least acknowledge what she's done. Some acknowledgement of what's been done. And there really is nothing. There really is no acknowledgement of what Sadako has done. It's just a snap of the finger and she's back to normal laughing. It's like, this is the Sadako that prior to becoming a witch was murdering her friends. And there's no real acknowledgement of that. And I think that's my only real frustration. Yeah, you can chop it up as that the witch was in control a long time before then, but it's always portrayed the witch as being with the red eyes. And thus it acknowledges the idea that Sadako herself, before she was taken over by the witch, was doing some horrendous stuff. And I think the lack of acknowledging that, whereas again, Takano did. They got into that with Takano. Takano was not that she was redeemed, don't get me wrong, but that she at least was shown what she did wrong. And she's paying for it, in some sense. Even Hojo has a moment where he acknowledges what he's been doing and pays for it. But we never really got that from Sadako, which is fine. Like I said, I'm happy in the end because mainly Rika gets to finally do what she wants to do. It technically left it with there could be things to come, that things aren't 100% cheerful. And I do like that. I think despite how we got there, I think the end is a really cool, eerie ending to it. This idea of we have eternity, we'll have some time apart, but we're always going to be together in the end. You can't escape that fate, I think is a cool thing. I'm not for the idea that all witches get purged out, all manipulators like Yua is knocked out of the picture. I'm fine with this aspect that the edge of chaos, I guess. We're not falling anymore, but we're still on the edge of chaos, and things still can happen. This is existence. This is what we have to deal with. And I do like that. I think it's a really cool way of ending it. So yeah, in the end, I loved a lot of these stories. Again, getting back into Rena's story was so well done. Getting into Mion's story was so well done, so heartbreaking. This is the writing that I've always loved about the series. Even with the loops, seeing certain perspectives was really great. Yes, I had problems with a lot of replayed animation, a lot of replayed scenes. I think there was one episode that felt like 98% of it was just replayed assets. But still, in the end, I was very satisfied. In the end, I love this series so much. And to get anything, even if it's a little bit of a letdown, in my opinion, maybe if I had my expectations set a little bit lower of what I expected, I probably wouldn't have that dissatisfaction of it. But I still loved it. I still love Higurashi in the end. I still love the series. And I got so much out of the series that I did really enjoy. So even in the end, it's a fantastic series. Love it to death. And I suggest it to anybody. I don't know why you would be watching this if you if you're wanting my perspective on if you should watch it or not. But that's my thoughts. That's my review of Higurashi When They Cry Sotsu. Still a lot of fantastic stuff. Really did enjoy it. I hope you guys enjoyed this review. If you did, leave a like down below. Comment, let me know what you thought of the series, or if you're going to check it out. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video if you can. Support us on Patreon if you can. We definitely appreciate everybody that does. And y'all take care.